Well, welcome to Fasting and Walking Prayer. My name is Jen Woodrum. I'm a PD coach. I'm out of Dallas, Texas, and we have Sue Russell who will be teaching us today about the practice of fasting and walking prayer. Before we get started, just want to go over a few things about Zoom. If you're in full screen mode and find that our videos get in the way at any time, you can always click and drag them around the screen. For some people, they'll be docked. For other people, they float. If you need to access the rest of your computer, if you hit the escape key, it'll shrink us down a little bit so that you can get to your menus and desktop and all of that. As you're using the chat window today, if you have comments or questions, feel free to put them into the chat window. We will be monitoring that. You can change your privacy settings on that. So if you prefer that only the panelists see your comment or question, please go ahead and change that setting, and we won't share your name with others. If you prefer everybody else to see, change it to panels and attendees. We will be sending out a survey later today along with a recording of this webinar. We do pay attention to the feedback that you give us, so we appreciate when you take a couple minutes just to do that. We will be trying to give you audio controls at different times throughout the session, and we'll let you know when we're doing that. And at that point, you can raise your hand instead of comments if you prefer. And with that, I will turn it over to Sue.
Okay, so you're going to let me share the screen?
Yes. You can now.
Okay, and I've forgotten how to do everything. Full screen, that's what I wanted to do. Thank you. All righty. So, all right, so here we are in our series on maintaining your spiritual vitality. Welcome, everybody. I was saying earlier that when I did this class during Lent for my church, this was the lowest attended class of the 6 classes. Nobody wants to talk about fasting. So I understand that, and so I appreciate those of you, the few, the brave that showed up for this class. And hopefully, like I try to do with all of these practices, I want to demythologize a little bit and make them more ordinary and a little less intimidating. So with that said, let's start with this discipline of fasting. So Unger's Bible Dictionary explains that the word fast in the Bible is from the Hebrew word sum, which means to cover the mouth, or from the Greek word nestuo, I believe that's pronounced, meaning to abstain. And the Bible, of course, speaks only of food fasts, but it is generally agreed by theologians that you can really fast from any number of things. And so people sometimes fast from social media, from electronics, from speaking, from shopping, things of this nature. In the Bible, the Day of Atonement, which is also called the fast, is the only fast day that's commanded by God, though other national fast days are mentioned in the Bible. Also, personal fasts are clearly expected of Christ's disciples, as Jesus talks about it in Matthew. So, fasting is not a way to impress God or to somehow get his attention, sort of like having a spiritual temper tantrum. You already have all of his attention. You have all of his attention you could possibly manage. You're never going to have more of his attention. So this is not a way of sort of spiritually jumping up and down going, hey, notice me, how great I'm being here. It's also, fasting is not intended as self-flagellation or self-punishment. This is not deprivation as a way of hurting yourself in that respect or punishing yourself. So, but fasting it's a means of identifying with the sufferings of others or the sufferings of Christ. Sometimes we fast from food or material things in order to identify with the suffering of those in the world that don't have those things, or the sufferings of Christ. Many people fast on Good Friday, for instance, to identify better with the sufferings of Christ. It's also a means of identifying things to which we are overly attached. I just want to sit on that for just a second. Things to which we are overly attached, which leads into the second, which is a means of exercising self-control. So sometimes there are things to which we are too dependent. We are too detached, and it's good for us to exercise self-control. So just from a sort of a practical standpoint in terms of that, it is good for us to exercise self-control. Another reason why a thing that fasting is, it's an opportunity to remind ourselves of how fragile we are, how dependent we are on things beyond ourselves. It's a reminder that we are not self-sufficient. Always a good thing to remember. And it's also a means of creating space in which to add something more beneficial. A lot of times we think about fasting in terms of this deprivation thing. And certainly we are depriving ourselves of something, but we're doing it for the sake of creating a space in which to add something else, maybe something better. So the question to ask is, what would you do instead with the time that you normally spend on the thing from which you're fasting? So the Bible gives lots of examples of fasting. King David wrote that he humbled himself with fasting. The Bible records that great men of faith, such as Moses, Elijah, Daniel, Paul, and Jesus himself, fasted so that they might draw closer to God. That's an interesting point. They fasted so they might draw closer to God. Jesus knew that his true disciples, once he was no longer there in the flesh with them, would at times need to fast to regain and renew their zeal to serve him. So fasting serves this purpose of helping to renew our zeal, renew our dedication, our commitment to God. James tells us, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. And constant prayer and fasting, not constant fasting, but fasting as a practice, will help us to do this. It also says in Matthew that we're not to fast to have people feel sorry for us or to think that we're pious. Again, with this, as with all other spiritual disciplines and practices, the goal is not to become a really good practitioner, right? The goal is relationship with God. And this is a way and a tool to help us with that. Isaiah 58 gives both good and bad examples of fasting, contrasting wrong attitudes and actions with the right approach of outgoing love. So that would be a really good passage to look at there in Isaiah 58. And Daniel and Nehemiah set examples of having a repentant frame of mind when going into fasting. So preparing to fast. So before you fast, you want to sit in silence with God and ask him to show you what it is in your life to which you are overly attached, overly dependent. Ask him to reveal that thing to you. What is it that you are too attached? What is it that has too much control over you? And then you want to ask him, okay, so then what should I do instead? Because remember, it's not just about letting go of something, but it's about creating space to add something better. So what should you do instead? So for instance, let's just take a food fast because that's an easy one. You know, when you're going to fast from food, from a meal or for a day or whatever, you know, there was time when we're going to spend shopping for the food, preparing the food, eating the food, cleaning up after the food. So if you're not going to do that, that leaves this chunk of time. So what are you going to do with that? Right? So that's a really great question to ask God. What would be better for me to spend my time on during that space? And then, of course, during your fast, you just want to record any insights or lessons you receive. Journaling and these kinds of lists and things like this doesn't have to be some long, formal journal, dear diary kind of entry. But it really can help to jot some things down as insights come to you, as God maybe shows things to you. You'll be really surprised, generally speaking. I always am surprised at what God asks me to give up, and then what kind of comes of that. I think usually that it's about one thing, this thing that I'm giving up. And then what I find is that it's attached to a whole lot of other stuff. It's got little strings. and you like pull one thread and a whole bunch of stuff comes out. And so we, oftentimes we think we're going to remember this stuff. We just don't. We're really bad at that. So it's really good to kind of jot those things down. That'll help you with that. So let me just ask you guys and Jen, you can maybe throw this open for them to be able to speak or to engage on the chat. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. In terms of what would be, let me just ask you guys, what has been your experience with fasting?
And just raise your hand or leave a comment in the chat, and I'll give you mic abilities.
Do you have any questions or comments about fasting? So that's the one question I'm asking. And then the other question is, those of you that have experienced fasting, what has your experience been like? Nothing. Okay, everybody's very quiet today. That's okay, I understand. All right. So then, okay, so Julie Lynn's asking, thank you. What if you have health issues related to food? Thank you, because I forgot to say that, and I meant to say that. If you're going to fast from food, please, first of all, consult your health professional before you do any kind of food fast, and make sure that that's okay. And so sometimes, depending on what the situation is, you might need to do sort of a modified food fast where maybe it's just you drink juices or broth, something along those lines, something very, very simple. So you may have to modify that, but again, hopefully you understand that it is more than just food. I sometimes think that food is kind of too easy in some respects. I think for some of us, there's much harder things, things that have much more control over us. But there is no doubt that a food fast is certainly a biblical thing, and so you might give it a shot. And again, you might just do a meal, fast from a meal, and start with that. So start small, but do be mindful, of your health. So thank you, Judy Lynn, for reminding me to say that. Diane says, I've done very few fasts, but it's always been very good. It's been a time to be much more devoted than normal to prayer. Yeah, a lot of times that's one of the big things that you can do to fill up that space of time is you get an opportunity to pray and have space and time for prayer that you would not have otherwise had. Sarah says, I didn't see the purpose in food fasting until I decided that every time I think about how hungry I am, I spend a few minutes praying. Yeah, that's a really good one. For me, like I did a fast on Good Friday, and when I felt those hunger pains, it caused, I used that as a reminder to think about what Christ was suffering, and to participate more fully in his suffering. So yeah, that's a really good one. What if all of I love it, Judy Lynn, you're so great. What if all you think about is food? Well, of course that's what you're going to think about. This is great, because what that's doing is that's telling you something. Okay, this is good information. If all you think about is the thing that you're fasting from, and that's the only thing you can think about, well, that's giving you some really good information in terms of things that perhaps you are overly attached to. And so that isn't going to just magically go away unless you practice a certain discipline. And so if all you're thinking about is the thing that you're fasting from, then clearly that has a ton of control over you. And so that's something that you want to develop self-control over. So this is good information. So that informs you going forward, so that you might want to practice this on a more regular basis for that very reason, so that you develop the spiritual muscle, if you will, of being less attached to a certain thing. Does that make sense? So Stacy says, we've done a Daniel fast as a church before. It ended up becoming more legalistic and focusing on the allowances of the diet rather than focusing on the reason for the fast. Then we fasted from something we felt devoted too much time and desire. So I did Facebook and sweets. That seemed much more beneficial and allowed space for prayer and the word. Yeah, exactly. And you do have to, yeah, sometimes, well, I mean, any one of these disciplines can become legalistic and be about, checking off boxes and collecting little gold stars. It again, it's and especially if you're doing like a group like that, there's that sort of that competitive thing that kind of comes up. I think that's maybe one of the reasons why the Bible talks about when you fast, you got to do it in secret. Nobody really should know what you're doing. It shouldn't be really obvious what you're doing. It's a thing just between you and God, and I think that probably has a lot to do with why you do that. Julian says, "What if your anxiety escalates to panic?" I think that the first thing to do when you're talking about fasting is you really do need to ask God what you need to do, because he knows you, right? And he knows you, and he knows what you can handle. And it may be that fasting from a particular thing is not, even though it seems like a really good idea, maybe that's not something that you should be doing. So again, anxiety, as I've said before, is like the check engine light on the dashboard of your car. It's trying to get your attention about something. So if you find that your anxiety starts to rise about whatever it is that you're fasting from, that's a really good opportunity to stop and pause and say, wait, what is this trying to say to me here? Where is this anxiety? What's it trying to tell me? Because it's trying to get your attention about something. Okay, so we tend to think of anxiety as the enemy. Anxiety is not the enemy. Anxiety is a friend because it's a teacher. So there's an opportunity there to evaluate. What is it that I'm being anxious about? Is this the thing that I should be fasting from right now? Or is this not a good place for me to be in right now? So that would be something to evaluate, maybe with a spiritual director. Would be something to do that. So someone else says, the last time I did a fast, it was for 12 hours, and the purpose was to pray for one of my sons. Every hour on the hour, I asked God how to pray for him, and I wrote down the prayers, a short paragraph. At the end of the day, it was amazing to look at the prayers God gave me to pray. Everyone was unique. That's a great example. That's a great example. And I want to go back to this question about, what if I kind of start to freak out about this whole thing? Start small with this. Start small. All right. So maybe a really small way to start is to fast from, you eat your dinner and to fast until lunchtime the next day. So basically you're just skipping breakfast. If that's what we're talking about, if we're talking about a food fast. So that would be a small way to start. If you're going to fast from, social media, start with a small period of time. Maybe I just won't look at social media from, 6:00 in the evening until, the next morning or something like that. So start small. Start small. You don't have to, do a week-long fast. Just, we're not trying to prove anything here. Any other questions or comments? Isn't it interesting, even as you guys are thinking about this and talking about this, how there's a certain kind of a level of kind of anxiety that kind of comes up? Don't you think that's kind of interesting? It's one of the reasons why this is usually one of my lower attended classes, because I think it does bring up a certain amount of anxiety. We don't like to say no to ourselves. This is a really fundamental truth. We don't like to say no to ourselves. We don't like to discomfort ourselves. So yeah, this is a really, really good one. I think it's deeper than most people think it is. In its difficulty and in its benefit. So again, the place to start is sitting with God and inquiring of him. What does he want you to do? When I did this, I was telling Jen before we started broadcasting a couple of Lenten seasons ago, when I sat with God and asked him what it was that he wanted me to fast from during Lent. I was so surprised at what he suggested. It wasn't what I thought at all in terms of what it was. And I was really surprised. And so I was like, okay, then I'll fast from that. And I thought it was about just that one thing. But it turned out that one thing was connected to a whole bunch of stuff and changed a whole bunch of stuff in ways that I had not at all foreseen. So it was really interesting, and it was really clearly God, because I would never have thought of that, and I certainly had no idea of what the impact, how broad the impact would be. I thought it was just about one thing. It was about a whole bunch of stuff, so it was kind of interesting. So yeah, so that really, ask God first. He knows your heart. He knows your life. He knows what is best for you, and so don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You can trust him with this, and you can trust him to be with you in it, and to walk with you on that journey as well. So if you have any other questions or comments about that, or you try it and you want to debrief the experience, of course, just send me an email, and I'm glad to set up a time to debrief the experience with you, or to talk about it in any way that would be beneficial to you. So, okay. So with that said, let me go back to our slides, and we're going to shift gears now and talk about a labyrinth, walking a labyrinth. So labyrinth, this is again one of those things that sometimes people think is kind of weird, or they don't even really know what it is. So a labyrinth is just a walking kind of prayer. It's prayer in motion, and a labyrinth is designed to be a metaphor for the Christian journey. It's a model or metaphor for our life in Christ. So the Christian life, it's often described as a pilgrimage or a journey with God, a journey in which we grow closer in our relationship with God, and in turn we also grow closer to others. In life, as in the labyrinth, we don't know where the path will take us, other than the fact that we know we're headed towards God. But we don't foresee the twists and the turns that the future holds, but we know that the path will eventually arrive at the center, which is God. And that's one of the big differences between the labyrinth and the maze. A maze is designed to confuse you and to get lost, and you have to kind of figure out. The one thing about a labyrinth is you'll never get lost. There is one path, there is one way in, and there's one way out. And so you just, as long as you follow the path, there's nothing to get lost, and you will absolutely arrive at the center, no problem. As you're walking the labyrinth, sometimes you'll see the path leads inward towards your goal, and you think you're almost at the end, and then it'll lead outward again, and you find yourself back at the, close to the perimeter. Sometimes we meet other people along the path. Sometimes we meet them face to face, and we step aside to let them pass. Some people catch up to us from behind and pass us, or other people we might pass on the way. At the center, you rest, you watch the others that are walking the path, and you pray. Sometimes you might stay at the center a long time, and other times you might leave very quickly. Let me show you just some pictures, just for those of you that have never seen a labyrinth. So you'll see again that this particular one here is divided by these little plantings, but they're not tall. Like you can't, it's not you can see over them. Again, this is not designed for you to get lost. So you see that even though it's very windy and circuitous, there is only one path.
We're not seeing the labyrinth.
You haven't seen these pictures?
No.
Were you seeing the screen before? Are you seeing that?
I think we've been watching you.
Oh. So you didn't see any of that. Okay. Why are you not seeing? So we're not sharing the screen again?
Mm-mm.
Why are we not sharing the screen, Jen? Help me.
When you maybe stop sharing your screen or what you think is sharing the screen, and when you hit share again, use the top left one that says screen on it. That way when you switch from screen to screen, it'll follow you. If you pick a specific one, if you move away to a different screen, it doesn't stay with you.
Let me go with,
there we go.
Okay. Oops. Screen sharing has stopped. As the shares, okay, let's try this again. Okay.
Now we're with you.
Yep. Okay, you're with me now?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me skip forward. Oh, that's not the right one at all. That's the Stations of the Cross. All right, let's put that. Stop sharing here for a second. Sorry, folks. I don't know what we did there. So it should be. It's not on my desktop. Okay, hang on a second here. Okay. Thanks for your patience, folks. Like we figured this out. Okay, now I've got that, but I'm not finding. All right, now let's see if we've got this. Okay, there's fasting. Slideshow. Okay. Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, folks. Okay. So there we go. All right. So y'all see this now? You can see this now? Yes. Okay, good. All right. Thank you. Sorry about that. I don't know what we did, but we fixed it. So there you go. So you can see this labyrinth here. It's these low bushes to help define the path. So it's not hiding. It's not something, again, for you to get confused by at all. There's one way in, one way out. There's a drawing above so you can kind of see. This is the classic labyrinth design. So again, you see that from the bottom, near the bottom, where you can just start and kind of go in. And it's one path, one continuous path. There's another one. There's another one that's just made out of stones, different colored bricks. So if you're looking for a labyrinth, there's a couple of things. If you Google labyrinths near me, you'll see if there are places that oftentimes retreat centers, different places. There's a beautiful one in downtown Los Angeles, believe it or not. But if you Google labyrinths near me, you'll find, hopefully, places that have a labyrinth that you can go and do this kind of walking prayer. I'm going to give you some things to do in just a second. I just want to talk about that. The other thing you can do if you are physically, maybe you're not able to do this kind of walking, or maybe there isn't a labyrinth near you, there are these things called finger labyrinths. And if you go on Amazon and you search finger labyrinths, you'll see these. They're usually made out of wood, and it's like a wood disc with this pattern carved into it, and you can sort of you follow the path with your finger. There's nothing magical or weird about this. I don't want you to get all weirded out about it. There's nothing magical about doing this, but what that does, and also really what the walking labyrinth does, is it just sort of helps to concentrate and focus your mind. And so it's a way of not being distracted as you do whatever exercise you're going to do through the labyrinth, which I'm going to give you some ideas here in just a second. So you can just follow this little winding path with your finger as a way of just kind of keeping your attention on what you're doing. And so it's just a tool for doing that. So they do have those things called finger labyrinths, believe it or not. So there you go. So here are some ways that you can use a labyrinth. One way is just to ask God a question as you begin, and then as you walk through, it's an opportunity to be still and to listen for an answer, to be still within movement. And for some people, this is a really effective way of praying. It helps them to move while they pray. So for some people, this is a particularly terrific exercise. So you just ask God, is there something he wants you to know? Or is there a specific question that you're grappling with right now that you would like to have an answer to? So ask him that question, and then begin your walk in a posture of listening and waiting. Another way you can do it is to pray for yourself and the things that are going on with you on your way in. As you get to the center, you just stop and just reflect on God's love for you. Just sit quietly and just experience the love of God. And then to pray for others on your way out as you go back out. You can also recite the Lord's Prayer as you walk, or you may recite some familiar scripture. Psalms are wonderful for this, or really any scripture can be used as a meditation. And you might say to yourself, well, what's the point of repeating these things over and over again? Isn't that vain repetition? Aren't we warned in scripture that we won't be heard because of our many words? Well, I just want to say that the emphasis there is on the word vain. The Bible doesn't tell us not to repeat things. In fact, the Bible repeats things all the time, especially in Psalms. You'll see there's a lot of Psalms that have very repetitive phrases, very repetitive refrains. So it's not the repetition that's bad. It's the vain repetition. In other words, the empty repetition without meaning. And so don't be afraid to take a scripture, to take a psalm, to take a prayer, and to repeat it again and again and again. For me, what I have found happens is as I say it again, and then I say it again, and I say it again, the discipline of that helps to really concentrate and focus my mind, and I start seeing things about that prayer or that verse, or hearing things that I didn't hear before. So give it a try and see what happens. Another way that you can do this is as you move towards the center of the labyrinth, you want to focus on letting go of the distractions or worries that keep you from God. So as you take each step, you can just sort of do this sort of exercise of the imagination that you just are throwing aside these different kinds of things, just letting go of this worry, letting go of this anxiety. And with each step, you can just imagine yourself sort of getting lighter and less burdened as you mentally just practice letting go of these different kinds of things. And then in the center, you just, again, spend time reflecting on your relationship with God and being aware of God's presence. And then as you leave, you spend time thanking and worshiping and praising God. Another thing you can do as you move towards the center of the labyrinth is just, again, focusing on letting go of the distractions and worries. And then as you sit in the center, just wait until God moves you to enter into the world again. and to take up the tasks that that he's called you to. And this idea of walking with Jesus back into your ordinary life. So let me just ask again now if there's, if you guys have, I'm going to stop the share here and ask if you guys have some questions or comments. Have you ever walked a labyrinth before? And what was that like? What do you think about what we're talking about here today? Any thoughts on that? I will say that when I've done retreats and people have had an opportunity to walk a labyrinth during that retreat, they are really, really surprised at what comes of it. It seems like a really simple kind of a thing, but it really can have an amazing and a profound effect. Yeah, yeah. It is a cool idea. Thanks for, yeah. And I think this is one of those things a lot of us as Protestants, we've never done. But it is a really cool exercise. And I think you'll be really surprised if you get a chance to do it at what your experience of that will be like. It's a neat kind of prayer. So I do have a labyrinth information sheet that talks about some of these things that I talked about in terms of ways to use the labyrinth and different things like that. So if you would like a copy of that, just send me an email and I'll shoot that off to you. Maybe I can we put that in the resources, Jen? Yeah, okay. So I'll add that to the resource list. I'll send you that after we're done here, Jen. That labyrinth information sheet. And so, yeah, you can just print that out and then just, you can take that with you if you want to. So one of the participants says the labyrinth my friend has here in the desert of Arizona was all sand and rocks. Yeah, quite different from the lovely green ones I showed. Yeah, some of them are just, sand and rocks. Or they're just paving stones, different colored bricks. So yeah, it just depends. They're really different, but they mostly all have that sort of classic kind of a clovery kind of design and stuff. It's based on the labyrinth in the cathedral at Chartres, France. And so that's what they usually are based on. Yeah. One of the participants, I'm looking at the labyrinth locator. There's one inside a church with different inlaid wood. Yeah. Some of it, and they're quite beautiful. And just a kind of a neat experience just in and of themselves. But yeah, all different kinds. Okay. So, all right. Well, then there you go. There's something new for most of you to try. And see what happens. And if you do go do a labyrinth and you've never done one before, you go do it. And I would love to hear from you about how your experience was in a labyrinth. Like I said, the people that I have led in this exercise during retreats and stuff have always been, oh yeah, one of the places says, does a printed one printed out on paperwork? Sure. Again, there's nothing magical about this. What it does is, as you sit there and you follow this with your finger, all it does is to help kind of focus your attention. It's just a tool to help focus your attention. And so it's a little bit different kind of experience, I think, than doing the physical walking. But it's still valid and can be an excellent experience. So it's just, just do one that's printed out on paper. The nice one with the wood ones that you can get from Amazon and stuff is that it's grooved, it's cut, so it's easy to keep your finger on the path and not kind of skip accidentally. So you just have to pay really good attention if it's just one on paper, so it's only like the one dimension. Just make sure that you haven't skipped onto a different line on the path. So just be careful with that. So, but yeah, just the very question that you're asked, does this work on paper? It, again, not a magical thing. It's just a different kind of a tool and a way to concentrate and focus your attention, because we're distracted people, easily distracted. So, okay. So again, I would love to hear from any of you about what your experience walking a labyrinth was like. I love hearing people's stories and things that they experienced and saw and had happen on those kinds of things. So please feel free to email me with that kind of thing. So, okay, so we've more or less come to the end of the list of topics for these webinars that I had originally made with Doug. And so I'm not at this point planning one for next month, but if there are topics that you think, oh, I would love to, to learn more about that, or hear more about these different kinds of practices or whatever, if you come across something or you know of something and you would like a webinar on that, please just let me know. And if it's something that I feel like I can do justice to, then we'll plan another one. So just keep watching in the USA Touch Points for another one to come up. Otherwise, of course, as you know, all of these are accessible on YouTube. Jen has the link for those to be able to access all of the previous ones. And so you can look if there's ones that you've missed or you want to view again, those are there available for you. As always, I'm available as a spiritual director. And so if that's something that interests you in terms of your spiritual practices that you would like to add spiritual direction, please contact me and I'm glad to work that out. I also do retreat planning for people. So if you'd like to do a solitary retreat and you'd like me to plan a framework for you for that, just get in touch with me on that. So there you go. Any final questions or comments before I turn it back over to Jen? Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Really have appreciated walking with you through all of these classes, and hopefully we'll have some more in the future as topics come up. So Jen, over to you.
All right, well, thank you again for joining us. I'll send out a survey later today, along with the recording of this and the link to all of our past webinars as well. So thanks for joining us.
Okay. God bless everyone.